talk about is just a little bit of their background and one mentor or expert that has influenced their career and their life. As we are entering a new age of AI, we're actually undergoing the greatest wealth transfer in human history, and we're seeing unparalleled challenges and global problems that we're facing. So with that, I thought it would be really important, since AI often serves as an intermediary with experts, to really celebrate human intelligence in our introductions. So with that, I'll turn it to Adam, and then Dale, and then Dee, and Tandy, and then Mary Ann. So introduction and an expert or mentor that has influenced your career or life.
Okay, I'm prepared for that one. So my name is Adam Moskowitz. I am a substitute speaker on your agenda. You'll see team merger. He's fortunately tied up in the closing, which is good because we are a private capital provider in structured finance world, and we finance solar projects and just solar projects. So as far as the mentor question goes, I've had the opportunity to come from commercial banking into more specialty lending, and the first chairman of Signature Bank, now failed, Jonathan Tamberlin, was a mentor to me. He's the guy who worked his way up from being a teller to being the chairman of a very successful bank at one time, while I was there particularly. So, and the number one thing I got to do with my mentor, and I think this is a training of all mentors, I got to ask them questions when I was young, and just ask stupid questions and smart questions, and that's how you get smarter. So I'll pass the mic.
I'm Dale St. Clair. I founded and run St. Clair Advisors after investing for New York City Public Pension Fund and running an asset management firm. So today I advise family offices, endowments, foundations, and public pension funds, and advise the New York State Common Retirement Fund on climate and sustainability portfolio. My mentor is Bill Paolino. I know none of you have ever heard of him. In the 1990s, Bill was CIO and Deputy Controller of New York City Pension Fund, and he had the courage to take a risk on a University of Chicago grad to run what was the first emerging manager program in the United States. Yes, I'm a University of Chicago grad, and the emerging manager program was defined as managers with assets under $1 billion. Most of them, or 85% of them, were women minority-owned firms. The others were not. It was an AUM-based definition, and it's really thrilling to see so many of those managers graduate, having graduated and being multi-billion-dollar firms. So I'm very excited that my first direct report was awesome. Hasn't always been the case, but he spoiled me, and so I have a high bar, and I'm excited to be with you today. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nidhi Chadha, the founder and CEO of Enzo Advisors. I founded Enzo several years back to focus on ESG and climate advisory for corporations and institutional investors across all asset classes. Prior to that, I was a portfolio manager at RBC Global Asset Management, focused on small mid-cap equities, and spearheaded ESG integration across our U.S. funds, and got so excited, saw the ESG train coming our way to the U.S., and took a pivot to build out my business over the last couple of years. With respect to focusing on investors, we cover everything from all asset classes, and more recently I've been having a lot more conversations with family offices and foundations and endowments. My mentor, and actually the expert that I really admire, is George Serafine. You may have heard of him as a Harvard Business School professor, pioneer in climate investing, and most importantly, co-pioneered a lot of impact-oriented accounting measures. And for that reason, I was so inspired by the work he's done, and my focus areas on linking finance and ESG and strategy was that I also decided to be a chief impact officer for a firm he co-founded, which is an AI intelligence platform that focuses on monetizing impact. So really the core of what I do is taking the so what of impact and sustainability, linking it to finance and using technology to do so.
Awesome. I feel like, I don't know if I can compete. I think next time I want to go first. Let's see. I'm going to start with who I admire. Well, one of my mentors early on, right out of undergrad, is a woman named Noreen Kennedy, who headed the Environmental Policy Committee for the U.S. affiliate of the International Chamber of Commerce. So I worked with her advocating on behalf of Exxon and P&G and others in environmental policy discussions with the US administration and the OECD and elsewhere, and learned really early on how important, if you don't have them at the table, you don't move anything forward. If you want to be honest, if you don't have them at the table, we saw what Exxon does and how much money they can spend being a spoiler if they're not at the table. And I think that as far as mentors, people I admire who I haven't met, people who I admire in the world, Jewish and come from Tikkun Olam, right? Heal the world. And I always admired Anwar Sadat and Nelson Mandela for the fact that they were able to step outside of themselves, and Mahatma Gandhi in the same way, and outside of the paradigm they lived in, and understand how to create peace on a different level and move nations and move the world in a different direction, kind of pulling from the last panel to this one. And so in the environmental space, I've always come to it from this deep drive to understand different stakeholders and their needs and their wants and their desires, and how we can move things by acknowledging each and serving them in a different way that actually long-term serves them better. So that's kind of how I came into this space. I came a circuitous route, and the short of it is I was a consultant at Bain Strategy for a couple of years, and then I did global strategy and M&A work for American Express before deciding that I was still somehow working 14-hour days or posted in Hong Kong for months at a time or wherever, and came back and started working with philanthropy, and have been frustrated about philanthropic models for many years. Since college, the whole Child Fund International just give $19 a month to the poor, pathetic child in need, and not even looking at that side of it, that is a problem. But the fact that 30 years later they hadn't solved one village. And that always bothered me. It was about taking on a new village and making them dependent, and then getting more money, making another one, and that model bothered me. And so I got really excited by social entrepreneurship and by funding social entrepreneurs that wanted to change the world, but do it with also some business mindset and models behind them, and then started seeing impact investors. I came from Harvard and Bain, and so was asked to judge for a lot of business plan competitions globally, and was seeing things making it through to the final rounds that were so obviously broken, literally. And afterwards, if anyone wants to ask, I will give examples of literally things that people were excited about that could kill babies, because they hadn't asked the right questions and they didn't see that side of it, which as soon as I talked through one or two basic questions, they're like, oh, that's really bad. And I was like, really? And I felt very strongly that in their traditional asset classes, to protect and grow their nest egg, they would have done the diligence and seen it. But on the impact side, they're like, oh, saves fuzzy bunnies, here's a check, right? And then they walk away and don't demand a board seat or quarterly reports or management changes, and come back 2 years later and they're like, oh, impact, concessionary returns. I'm like, well, if you did that in your traditional portfolio, you'd have concessionary returns there too. So I started being a bigger advocate of just working on this side of it, working with investors to help think through how they diligence and do their impact across asset classes within the alpha of that asset class. And Chelsea and I met long ago because of that. So I'm gonna evangelize on that, and that's what got me to this space of aligning wealth, impact, and then for individuals, wealth, impact, happiness, and legacy, and how you make them all work together.
Wonderful. My name is Thompson-Frenk, and the way I got into this space, especially when you asked about my mentor, my first mentor was my father. He was CEO of 7-Eleven. That was the family business. My grandfather began it. And being a nosy kid, my father would bring home his documents at home, and I would call it his homework. And he had a big stack of papers, and I remember looking at them as a kid. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and they had a list of countries on one side, and on the other side they had a list of things from 15 cents all the way up to $25. And I asked my father, what is this about? And he said, well, the shareholders want us to manufacture something. They've chosen $7.50, so I'll look up and see who's asking for that. And again, I was about 4 or 5 years old, so the world is very black and white to me. And I said, well then, why don't you go to the people asking for 15 cents, get them the pre-approved $7.50, make everybody happy, improve their lives, and your shareholders happy. And I just skipped away. My father came over to me, I'll never forget this. He got on his knees so that we saw eye to eye, and he said to me, thank you for reminding me what my real job in this world is. And I've never thought about that again. But then years later, it was 1996, I'm a senior in high school, I'm sitting in my bed, my father comes in the room and he throws Alexis and the Olive Tree, a book and he said, everyone in your generation and younger should be required to read this because this is the world you're going to inherit. And he was absolutely right. He was introducing me to the concepts of globalization in Thomas Friedman's book. But then he also said to me, but you know what, remember when you told me to do that? He said, we actually did do that. Don't ask me, I don't know anything except it was in South America somewhere. But he said, we did that, and they have built schools, roads, hospitals, everything, and not a dime has been charity. And it helped me really recognize, here's my father who had been doing Jerry Lewis telethons. He was really very philanthropic, really, ahead of his time in many ways. But when you sit behind the desk, whatever any of us in this room are doing, we're not just deciding someone's salary, we're deciding, is that person going to get to have, one job and get to spend that time with their family, or they're going to have to work 2 extra jobs to make ends meet? We're really deciding the quality of life of a whole community when we make those decisions, and nothing less. So, for me, that was my introduction to social responsible investing. In terms of, and I now do that through UTF Holdings, which supports Sustainable Development Goals. And my philanthropic side, I have the Mimnazine Institute, and we focus on helping the world deal with the challenges of globalization. And we now have chapters in Israel, Palestine, Mexico, where we have 2 campuses serving the Maya and the Tolteca children and communities. We also have a chapter in Asia serving, based out of Japan, but serves throughout Asia, and is working on reconciliation between South Korea and Japan. We also have a chapter in the UK in which we're trying to expand one of our programs, Food Source, which began here in the United States, where we saved $55 million worth of food being thrown to landfills. We're now expanding that to do service over there in Europe as well.
Thank you to our panelists. I will go ahead and share my answer as well, and then we'll dive into the very carefully reviewed. I think this might be one of the most prepared panels I've ever worked with in terms of really curating amazing questions. So when I think about my answer in terms of a mentor that has shaped my life, I would say it was Lori Katz. Lori was my first next-gen advisor that I met at a community called Nexus. And from figuring out impact pitches to my own family to figuring out how to launch brands or companies, my life was forever changed the day that I met Lori. So as you think about Opal, know that you're in this room with experts that could change your life and could change your kids' lives. For me, at Logic Tree, Chris and I have partnered in business and in life to grow an expert community and a global brand, scaling the importance of human intelligence amidst the era of AI. And we also believe that now, more than ever, we need to invest in the future generation as they face global challenges and as they face things that we haven't seen before, like the greatest wealth transfer in human history. So what a perfect time for this panel to think about the importance of, yes, investing, and yes, being a next gen, but how to do that responsibly. And I couldn't be more excited to dive into this with the experts that we have here today. So the first question that I have is, we're going to start with Marianne Thompson-Frenk. She gave a little bit about her background, but one of the things I can say that I know personally about Marianne is she spends every day intentionally thinking about how she not only makes the world better, but how she elevates others around her and shines a light on them. And for me, she's taught me a lot in terms of how to navigate the impact space and how to communicate around it. So Marianne, can you share a little bit about the difference between impact, ESG, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals?
Sure. ESG, everyone likes it. It's about being environmentally, responsible, and all that's good. But the problem that I've often seen is that people are kind of choosing either or. If they're social responsible investing, let's not have sweat cams, slave labor. That's a good thing. ESG, let's try and mind the environment. The reality is we need to be doing both. And we shouldn't be trying to wash things over and say you have a sweatshop over here, but ooh, you're being green. That should not be okay in our portfolio. So to me, when we're talking about, social responsible investing, I think of it as people, planet, profit. And one of the things that we don't hear enough in conferences like this is the B Corp. Most of us in the business sector are familiar with Victor LeBeau, but as most of us are really honest, Victor LeBeau business ethics has nothing whatsoever to do with morality. So if we actually want to make that difference, we have to give the planet and humanity equal consideration to our shareholders. And if we can begin designing our for-profit companies and enterprises with that in mind at the very beginning, then we're not going to have as much of an issue down the road. I also think that in terms of, people talk about philanthropy versus investing. Right now, to me, the future of humanitarianism is using both for-profit and non-profit means. So, for example, I have a project right now called the African Breadbasket Project. Many of you are aware, with the war between Russia and the Ukraine, a bridge was destroyed. What many people aren't aware is that cut off the entire continent of Africa from grain. This is very similar to a World War I type scenario. So it's actually in everyone's interest who doesn't think they're going to profit from a World War III that we actually get the entire continent of Africa producing its own grain. So last year we were able to get 160 families out of the war zone in the Sudan into South Sudan, for example. But then, so what? Now they're sitting there. So you can't philanthropically plan on sustaining their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. You have to make a for-profit investment so that they can actually sustain themselves. So now we have both a for-profit and a non-profit strategy that are, if you think of it like in a clock, the cogs are working together. And one brings people out, one helps people start a new life. The key to it, though, is that we're setting up the investment process so that as profit is made, a percentage goes back into the nonprofit to get more people out of the war zone. So to me, that's how for-profit and nonprofits are working together. So yes, you have conscious capitalism, social responsible investing, you care about making sure things are eco-responsible, but I think that the real future of humanitarianism is that we're using all of these tools together.
Yes.
So I just thank you for that comment. I learned a lot, and I'm sure many of you did. I'd like to add another perspective because ESG, I don't live in a world where everybody likes ESG. I wish that was the case, but it's not. But the good news is once you define what ESG is, then you actually find common ground, and in fact, getting lost in the letters is some of the issue. I work in the part of my work includes Texas oil families. And I also have a background as an oil and gas banker, structured finance banker, combined with asset management. So that dual roles give me opportunities to help with portfolio companies, not just from an asset management perspective, but as a banker. And as in my role as CIO at Arivos in Houston, which is a family office focused on energy, never would Arivos have invested in a clean energy company for any reason other than financial returns. And I say that because if you ask any of these, and they have to be men, if you ask the founders, it was stunning when I shared with them not anything about the elements of what was clearly a company that had ESG matrix, specifically clean energy matrix. I mean, the matrix are fairly obvious without even quantifying this. Speaking clearly about the numbers, the teams, anything you would do if you're doing investing directly in a company from an equity perspective. That company today, I helped them take it public on NASDAQ in February 2023 when nothing was going public. So I share that with you because while I was working with them and educating them on the terminology of many others in the world, like ESG, I did a sustainability audit, which I define sustainability. You can call it an ESG audit. You can call it any of the names that you want, but it's a framework so that the founders and the owners of the capital understand what matrix that are market recognized does their investment fall into, what's measurable, reportable, quantifiable. So I just wanted to share that while everyone on the surface will say something and respond based on words and letters or politics, once you just focusing on the financial returns, which in this case was a requirement, then you find common ground.
Thank you. Chelsea, can I just jump in really quickly on that one?
Yeah, so I was actually going to pose it to you, Nikki, and maybe also think about kind of what we even shared on the panel prep call. you really kind of shared with me, which I think is so important, that a lot of people think that ESG or SDG or climate means that they have to sacrifice on returns. And I'd love if you'd share whatever it was you wanted to chime in on, but also touch a little bit on your thoughts around how investing in those areas doesn't have to mean or shouldn't even mean, and a lot of times we see impact portfolios outperforming. So we'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, perfect. So, Marianne, your perspective on thinking through all these components is spot on, correct? And the way I think about it is from a financial lens. You know, if you think about sustainable investing as the overarching umbrella, if you will, you've got the responsible investing that's more from a screening standpoint. You're not investing in certain areas. You have the other extreme of impact where you still care about traditional financial returns, but you also incorporate societal returns. So you don't forget one versus the other, you're thinking about both. And then the middle bucket is really using ESG frameworks. It's about optimizing risk-adjusted returns, and that's really a big part of what I focus on when I'm helping with corporations. And what I was going to say earlier to your point was I work with corporations that are public companies, and they are actually getting pressured by regulations and stakeholders today. Because of that pressure, irrespective of what sector they're in, they're thinking about what they need to do from a framework standpoint. So I actually work with several oil and gas companies actually that felt pressured because of their stakeholders, because of their stock prices, and frankly just from their board in terms of what their policies were, both from an E standpoint as well as an S standpoint. And believe it or not, 100% of the oil and gas companies I work with, what do they do first? DEI scorecard. DEI scorecard before a greenhouse gas footprint and a decarbonization plan, which I was just surprised by. But it just shows that how much what stakeholders want and what regulators want really matters in shaping the program. So, you know, with respect to focusing on financial returns and what's relevant, the way to think about it is if we are looking at optimizing the risk-adjusted return bucket, how do you go about doing that? Sustainable investing is about value creation, and that's what these companies are recognizing. So my work is largely taking these factors, whether you look at any standardized factor from an industry standard or any global standard, and saying, why does this matter to a business? And so we were to think about that as a framework and as a starting point. We take a look at those aspects of the business and we say, why does this matter to financial returns? What is the ROI of actually putting this into progress and into a plan? And with these oil and gas companies, a lot of them recognize that first we focus on what's material, and then we identify, you know, how do we want to incorporate scenario analysis to improve those returns. So, for example, here's a simple example that I can talk to with any asset class. Let's say you're a consumer products company, you're owned by private equity. There are three avenues for value creation: improving revenue, reducing costs, improving cost of capital. If you're a consumer products company, you can launch an organic brand. You can think about other ways to capitalize on market demand. That's revenue potential. Cost savings would be anything from operational efficiency, energy savings. It could be anything from supply chain optimization. It could also be using better materials and optimizing your margins that way. And then lastly, cost of capital, which is really about regulatory alignment and thinking about supply chain disruption, cybersecurity. All these elements together create value, and that is what investors are focused on, what regulators are also pushing companies to focus on. And that's why ESG, beyond just the acronym, which I know has become such a controversial term, it's about sustainability and driving that value creation and operations. And that's really the core of why these companies are moving the needle at this point.
So I think we kind of touched on, you know, ESG in some circles could be a great word, in other circles could be a bad word. Even for me, I worked within the UN for several years. Some families really like the UN, some families really don't. And it's definitely very difficult if you're coming from a place of how do we move capital towards, and how do we move technology, and how do we move businesses towards, yes, making money, but also a better world. And so this question will be for Adam and for Tammy, but would love, Adam, first you to kind of touch on, if you're a family looking to invest in, you know, climate or sustainability or responsibly, how do you really know and how do you really determine what are the key things we should be looking for to make our sound investments?
So I feel like a little bit of a party crasher here in that we are Sun Capital is a lender in just the solar companies. We do one thing and that's all we do. So when we're here, we're at a family office conference, we're here basically offering the opportunity to invest in a company that is a pure play, easy, check the box ESG investment. Every dollar that comes into us, we put back out in the market so that it's funding the generation of a kilowatt, a green kilowatt. It's just solar, it's always solar. So I think my message here today is sometimes it can be simple. There are companies out there that are worthy of your investment. You can look at us if we choose to or not. But sometimes it can be simple, especially in the energy production world or in the energy efficiency world. My prior experience for solar was in the land of PACE, C-PACE financing. So if you guys are aware of that, you can not only generate energy that is green, but you can also just save energy. So there's a lot of businesses, AI models, etc., that are in the efficiency space, where when you have a family office client that wants to make an impact and sort of have it be very simple, energy is I think the first and easiest place to go for something that's just neat, clean, and green, and you can figure it out. So within another 2 or 3 minutes of talking, I can probably get you to understand what we are and what we do, but we're not that strange. Right? There's other companies that are simple and easy. So I think when you're talking to the family office environment, sometimes it's good to not just seek alpha, but seek simple, right? Like, there are investments out there that are worth looking at, generally on energy production and energy savings, in my humble opinion. So I think that's where I'll leave that.
Thanks, Dad. Tammy, I would love if you could share maybe a fun story around a family or somebody that you know where you came in and really helped them diligence something where they either were going to make a mistake in investing responsibly or they did make a mistake, and maybe share.
Some of my favorite stories. Okay, without outing anyone at all, I'm trying to be okay. So one of my favorites, I won't even out a family office. In general, this is part of how I ended up getting hired by some because of a business plan competition. And we were in the semifinal rounds at Columbia Business School, going from like thousands to 30 to 2. And this plan called Ultra Safe Ultrasound is amazing. It's to combat femicide in India. It's for profit, B Corp or impact aligned. They're in beta. GE's on their board because what it was is a very cool software that you could inject into any existing in-field ultrasound machine, and it would find and block the genitalia. And it actually had the server in some other country where a technician could see the whole thing in case there was a mutation in the genitalia. So you couldn't, and it would send back a red light. So you couldn't even bribe the technician, like they couldn't see it. And everyone who read it, they broke us into subgroups, no one's read 30 plans, so the people who read it must have been really articulately written because they're like, oh my God, this must win. This is like the best plan, hands down, this ends. And there's 500,000